Our scripture this morning is a short one. It is actually just one verse in chapter 9 of the Gospel of Luke, verse 51, and we hear these words for us this morning. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. May we share a word of prayer together. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts, be strengthening and pleasing to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The pastoral partners for several months had been reading a book called Just Mercy, a book by Bryan Stevenson, who is a lawyer who advocates for justice work, works primarily in Alabama, has worked with people on death row, has worked with juveniles in the court system and trying to work through unjust systems and getting proper justice for people that he is representing. In one of the chapters of his book, he tells this story. Charlie had seen it before. Many other times he had seen it happen. When his mother's boyfriend would come home from the house and had too much to drink. On 3 different occasions, when he came into the house that way, his mother ended up in the hospital every time. He had seen the violence and the abuse. It almost reached a boiling point. And that night, it happened again. His mother was significantly injured. He was worried about the safety of himself. He decided to take out a gun, ended up killing his mother's boyfriend that night. Immediately was arrested, taken to jail, and was going to be tried as an adult at the age of 14. Bryan Stevenson got a call while Charlie was in prison by Charlie's grandmother. His grandmother said, "I need you to take my grandson's case. I've heard you take lots of cases, and I think if you take this case, my grandson has a chance." And Bryan initially said, "I've got so many cases, I don't have time for another, but I am willing to go down to the jail and visit with your grandson." He went down to the jail, visited with Charlie, had a hard time getting any information out of him, but what he could get out of Charlie decided for Bryan that he decided to take on the case. And in the work that he did early on, was able to transfer the sentencing as an adult to being sentenced as a juvenile at the age of 14, and was able to get him out of the adult jail and into a juvenile jail. He knew that there would be some sentencing involved, would not get off from the killing of her mother's boyfriend, but knew the sentencing would be more gentle for a 14-year-old versus an adult. During that time period that he was in jail, his grandmother passed away, and his mother had a hard time getting over all the violence and abuse that she had encountered. When Charlie was getting close to the window that he would be released from his juvenile jail time, there was a couple that approached Bryan, and they felt like they could, with permission of the family, take on the care of Charlie. And Bryan was open to that, but Bryan had a conversation with them and said, if Charlie is able to come and be with you, if he's open to doing that, I need you to not expect a whole lot from Charlie. The thing he has witnessed with abuse in the house, and his own wrestling with his own situation of why he's there in the first place. Don't expect too much out of Charlie. And the couple said, "Well, I hear what you're saying, but we're going to expect a lot of Charlie. And if we can't expect a lot of one another, what are we here for? So we're going to expect a lot of him. We're going to hope better for him. We're going to help him to the best of our abilities, help him heal through the tragedies of his life. And if we can't expect better, if we can't hope better, if we can't heal better, then we are surely doomed as a human race." In the visits that the couple made to Charlie in juvenile jail before his release, they developed a little rapport with one another. Charlie told Bryan Stevenson his biggest fear by going with this other couple was that they wouldn't like him. They wouldn't like who he was or what he had done. On the day of his release, they were there to meet him at the gate and welcomed him into their home. And two things happened. That couple helped Charlie achieve his graduate equivalency degree, a GED degree, and also funded his college education so that he could find a way to thrive through the darkness that he had experienced. As I read that story in Just Mercy, the phrase that stuck with me in that story was, "We will expect more of Charlie." At the time where you want to be sensitive, maybe hold back, the couple felt like higher expectations, not putting too much pressure, but believing in the potential of what Charlie could do should be greater than not. Our one-verse scripture today in chapter 9 of Luke, we simply have the passage where Jesus decides to turn his face to Jerusalem. Chapter 9, verse 51. To me, that's an interesting place for Jesus to make some kind of declaration or body movement, or if there's this physical turning of his face to Jerusalem, or just saying Jerusalem is in our future, and saying that at chapter 9, verse 51. Now, I'm sure Jesus wasn't waiting till verse 51 to say that, because there was no gospel back then. But he said it early enough that I think it's significant, and scholars feel it's significant, that Jesus is said to have done this in chapter 9. Why would Jesus need to say, we're going to go to Jerusalem that early in the gospel? His triumphal entry doesn't happen till halfway through chapter 19. We're 10 chapters away from Jesus entering Jerusalem, and here Jesus says, I'm setting my face to Jerusalem. One of the things we know out of this passage, and Luke is and oftentimes kind of called the justice gospel of the gospels, knew that hard times were ahead. And Jesus wanted to make clear, I think, in his declaration in chapter 9, that I'm going to declare who I am, what's important to me, and what I expect of myself and of the followers that are around me and the world we live in. I'm going to declare my expectations now so that I'm not just responding to the moment. Well, maybe we'll go to Jerusalem. Maybe we'll do something. Maybe I'll respond to that or not. Jesus was clear, this is who I am. This is what's important to me. I mean, we go all the way back to chapter 4 in Luke. It's when he goes to the synagogue. He talks about recovering sight to the blind, the oppressed go free. Early on, he was declaring it. Chapter 9, he says, we've got to go to Jerusalem and face all the things we are called to face. We can't just skirt around the edges and make the movements we need to make in our life. Jesus knew the moment they entered Jerusalem, it would be a difficult experience for them and him as well. He would have to face his own religious tradition, ways he had maybe upset religious leaders at the time, upset about the notions of, we have a good thing with the Roman Empire, don't mess it up. And Jesus evidently was one of those agitators messing things up. He knew if he went to Jerusalem, he had to face the key religious leaders of his day, of his own tradition. He knew if he went to Jerusalem, he would face the impact of the Roman Empire and what the Roman Empire might do to him if he spoke truth to power in those moments. He easily said, we'll do this ministry thing, but we're not going to Jerusalem. We'll go anywhere but. He could have easily said that, but he didn't. He knew that Jerusalem was the center of power in a lot of different arenas. And for him to address and say early on, at some point, we will be in this place, and we must face the hardships of the reality in which we live. At the same time, we have to declare with a sense of conviction and a sense of peace and a sense of what the beloved community should be. Unless those people hear what that's even possible, how would they even know an alternative way of living in the world? Jesus was expecting more of himself, expecting more of the disciples, expecting more of the people around the disciples that had begun to follow him, expected more of the world in which he lived. And he challenged all the powers and principalities of his day to check where they were and how they might assess their place in the world. Now, one of the things I am privileged in this way of this church, the many ways this church has taken on various forms of justice. We have a whole host of various justice issues. For a church our size, you look at our connection, thinking, how in the world can we do all that stuff? I mean, some people don't even read from top to bottom the connection. I mean, it's a pretty long digital document of all the things that happen in a 2 to 3 week window of time. And yet we have all these opportunities. It's never designed for one person to do all that stuff. It's not humanly possible to do what's in the connection for one person. But amongst the membership and the people that are connected to our church, there are possibilities abound for us to connect and make a difference. Almost from the inception of this church in 1991 was a justice for our earth, a care of our ecology, knowing that the very planet that God created, that we are co-caretakers of this planet. We are not simply there to take advantage of what's there, but to be mindful of what's there and how do we care so we can leave it better than we found it. And yet we find ourselves today thinking all the strides we've made with ecology justice, we see the exact opposite happening. We see evidences to repeal back EPA regulations, to pull back what needs to happen with electric resourcing and the use of fossil fuels and how we care for our planet and what ways we do that. The rejection of maybe science that helps us tell how do we do that. And we can forge forward and advocate for our things. We eventually get to the point where, gosh, there's so much. There's such an onslaught of stuff. I try and try and try. It seems like every time I take a step forward, I'm taking 2 steps back. Maybe I should just kind of give up this advocacy thing. It doesn't seem like we ever win when we're trying to advocate for the things we want to do. But that's not what Jesus' ministry was about. We expect more out of ourselves. We expect more out of our church community. We expect more out of our world. We can't just say, well, I've had enough. I've had enough facing the powers, and the powers win, and I'm going to let them carry on, and I'll just do what I need to do. Or we think about all the work we've done with racial justice work over the last 5.5 years, education work, going out in the community, standing on street corners, doing what we can to advocate for equity of people. We know there's all kinds of differences and challenge, and no one wants to name racism amongst our powers that be. Recognize that our system is designed to help some people more efficiently than other people. That people are challenged just by the color of their skin or the communities in which they live. The inability to accumulate wealth or legislation from years gone by that limited the opportunities of people where they could live. I mean, in Johnson County alone, we have too many employees of companies. They can't even live in the county in which they work. The inequities are there, and the racial justice work we're doing is trying to inch our way forward to address the very systems that break people and separate people apart rather than living in more equity and harmony with one another. I think of the onslaught of legislation that's against the trans population in particular, the LGBTQ community, and the work we do at Pride events, drag queen events, advocating for legislation that supports the wellness and wholeness and thriving of all people. And we can look at the legislation and say, are we ever going to make any progress with any of this stuff? I kind of give up. I've done my part. I've joined the advocacy work and it's not going anywhere. I'm going to let somebody else do it. Or do we say to ourselves, I expect more out of myself. I expect more out of our church. I expect more out of the community and the world in which we live. I think of issues around the support or lack of support that we see for immigrants in our communities. I see it with affordable housing, food distribution, the availability of food. All these issues just seem to get larger and larger and almost can overwhelm us to a place where we are frozen, to a place of inaction, thinking about it, praying about it, but not actually doing something about it. One of the things that Jesus knew in chapter 9, or at least what we call chapter 9, was he knew at that point forward, his ministry is only going to get more intense, more difficult, more challenging, and more threatening to their lives. And we feel the threat and the weight of things, we're not sure where to go next. Well, we're seeing it powerfully right now, this last week, with the killing of Charlie Kirk, a person that I probably don't have anything in agreement with. That person didn't deserve to die because of gun violence, because of a disagreement of an idea or a thought. The proliferation of guns, the inability for guns to be regulated in any kind of way. My driver license is more difficult to get than to get a gun in my life. We have people in this church that are advocating through grandparents for gun safety, for smart, sensible ways to navigate healthy, safe communities. Over 80% of our U.S. population wants some kind of measures of safety to gun control. And yet we have a small number of people who have a lot of power, who are funded by all kinds of agencies, prevent any of that from ever coming to a vote or even a discussion on the floor of any of our states. And we could say to ourselves, well, we did what we could. We fought the good fight. Or do we expect more out of ourselves, out of our church, out of the world in which we live? Brian Stevenson, when he shared with that family, don't expect too much out of Charlie. He's been through a lot. But what if we don't expect more? What are we left with if we don't expect more out of ourselves? In this month, we're talking about joining the brave journey. There's a lot embedded in a phrase, joining the brave journey. One, you're going to join. You're going to make a decision to be a part of something. The brave part is, it may not be easy. It may be hard and challenging. It may expect the very core of our beings and whatever it is that we're brave with. Sometimes we're brave with our personhood. We're stepping into places that are uncomfortable, places we've never been before. Communities where I'm not sure I want to go to that community. But unless we're brave in those spaces and create dialogue, opportunities, conversation, we will never know what our potential is if we don't expect more out of ourselves and the communities in which we live. The same can be true for how we are generous with one another. Is my giving enough? Or do I expect more out of myself and what the church does, what we want to accomplish together as a congregation? The dreams and possibilities of this church are endless to me. I mean, our connections already, as I said, long of things we're doing. We can say, well, we've done enough. And we can know that there's more work to be done. Jesus set his face to Jerusalem. I think he partly said it for himself. I think he partly said it for the disciples. I think he partly said it for all the people that have the company of men and women that were around him already. Now is the time to get brave when it's hard to be brave. It's easy to be brave in the simple, safe spaces. It's hard to be brave in the hard and challenging spaces. But if we don't expect the best of ourselves, even in the most challenging of moments, we leave ourselves to whatever will happen. Well, whatever happens, happens. To me, that's not an acceptable way for us to live in the world. If we're going to expect more of ourselves, our church, our community, we have to examine within ourselves, each one of us, and collectively, what's expected of us. Charlie's surrogate family, one of the very best for Charlie. He had had a hard life, a challenging life, one that wanted to erase many of the horrific memories that were a part of his brain and in his mind. But they said to him, "You have so much potential. You can bring so much good to the world." They expected so much of him, and he had the potential to do so much. I wonder what Jesus' expectations are of us. If Jesus were to walk in the door today, would he come up to you and say, "This is what I expect of you"? I wonder what that would be. And I wonder how we would respond.